In this video, we are start to learn the time series patterns. And before we dive in the time series pattern, I want to call out what is a time series. A time series is a sequence of observation on a variable measured at a successive point in time or over a successive period of time, such as measure every hour, every day, every week, every month, or every year. As you can notice, the big difference between time series and the cross-sectional data is that for the time series data, we can find the data we collected has a relationship with time. Okay, such as I mentioned many times, the stock price, the daily sale of the product, the number of the customer visit every hour. And so as we collect the data for those variables, we are collecting the data for every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year. So therefore, we are actually able to plot the time series data as a time series plot. Basically, the vertical axis is this time series value, and the horizontal axis is the value for time. And so the objective of the time series analysis is to uncover a pattern in a historical data or time series. Okay, after we know what is time series, what is a time series plot, and now we can dive into a very popular time series patterns. So the first pattern I want to share is about horizontal pattern. So what is horizontal pattern? So a horizontal pattern exists when the data fluctuate randomly around a constant mean over time. As you can see on the time series line plot on the right-hand side on the slides, so we are looking at the 12 weeks of data for the gasoline price. As you can see, the vertical axis is how many thousands of gallons of gasoline were sold, and the horizontal axis is each week. And so for the time series plot, we are looking for the relationship between the time series data and the time. And as you're looking at this plot, we do see the fluctuation up and down because this is real world data. There's no data just perfectly straight line, right? However, if we look at the data, seems like you can very easily identify a line because this line is go through my up and down line plot, but seems like the up and down are very centered around this line. And then if we actually calculate the mean of all my gasoline price, and then we are able to get the mean value equal to 19,250 gallons. So in this situation, if you try to find this approximate line that is showing the line plot are kind of evenly distributed around this line. So if this line is a horizontal, we call the time series data is following a horizontal pattern. Again, when you plot any time series data, you rarely gonna see a straight line. If you are dealing with the real world data, you're always gonna see this kind of fluctuation. So this kind of data pattern, as we can see that if you can see the data is evenly distributed around this horizontal line, and we will call it horizontal pattern. Okay. How about the other pattern? Before we move on, so it's called a stationary time series. So how we define stationary time series? So basically the horizontal pattern we just saw is considered as a stationary time series because the process generating data has a constant mean, right? It is 19,250 gallons. And the variability of the time series is constant over time. As you can see, they are evenly distributed around my line. So we don't see any dots are very far away from line. We do have line far away from line, but they are evenly distributed. So in that situation, the variability of the time series is constant over time. So if these two conditions meet, we know the time series data are stationary. And then, so the reason we are very focused on the time series data that has to be stationary is because a lot of model we're gonna learn in this module require data to be stationary. And we are not focusing on if the data is not stationary, how can you convert to stationary? So that will be something can be covered in other upper level classes like economic forecasting. And you will be able to learn more in terms of how to converting a non-stationary time series data to a stationary time series data. Okay, so we call this out because the horizontal pattern show indicating our data is stationary. Now, the second we're going to look at is called a shift in horizontal pattern. As you can see on the same diagram, similar diagram, it is about the gasoline. Instead of looking at the first 14 weeks, we're extending the time period to the 24 weeks. And from this diagram, you can see that the first 14 weeks is looked very perfectly horizontal around the 19,000 gallons. And however, after the beginning at the 13th weeks, as you can see, the line kind of changed. It is still horizontal pattern, but it's at a different level. So in this situation, we call it shift in horizontal pattern. So this changing the level of the time series make it more difficult to choose a proper forecasting method. So selecting a forecasting method that adopt well to change in the level of a time series is always important consideration. So as you can see, we're learning a pattern because later we're going to learn what kind of model can fit in certain time series pattern. That's what we focused on this. Okay, so as you can see here, although we can still find a horizontal pattern, however, after 13 weeks, this horizontal pattern shifts to the next level. So this is called a shift in horizontal pattern. So the next is called a linear trend pattern. A time series that the exhibit show gradually shift or move to relatively higher or lower value over a long period of time. It is said to have a trend pattern. As you can see on the right hand side, we are looking at the illustrating the bicycle sales measured by 1,000 the bicycles. It's look very different from the gasoline cell chart, right? For the gasoline cell chart, although we see the change, but the change is very dramatic. It's at from 12th week to 13th week, it is instantly go up, right? So that's a dramatic change. And the second is after they make that change, it become the horizontal again. So in this situation, we'll call it the shifting horizontal pattern. So the difference between the line trend pattern is that the change here is take a long period of time to shift. So you can see we're no longer able to find a horizontal line. Instead, we are able to see an upward line, right? So it's an upward line. So in this situation, we consider this is a linear trend pattern. So it's going upwards. So the up and down movement are visible, but the time series has a systematically increased upward trend. So this is called a linear trend pattern. So make sure you are able to distinguish between linear trend pattern and a shift in horizontal pattern. Okay, again, the key difference is this shift is happening, is a shifting or a trend slowly going up or slowly going down. So the next is called a non-linear trend pattern. Similar to linear trend, we are able to see upward or downward. However, instead of picturing it as a linear, a line, we now will see a curvature. So sometimes this trend can be described better by a non-linear trend pattern. As you can see, this about the cholesterol, the revenue of the cholesterol drugs, so some kind of drugs, since the company won FDA approval for the drug 10 years ago. So for the past 10 years, as you can see, you definitely can use the line, right? So straight line, but you can see the line, if you use a straight line, the dots are not evenly distributed around this straight trend. So most of the line is below this straight trend, right? However, if you do a curve, you actually might be able to find the dots is up and down around this curve. So in this situation, we consider the non-linear trend. It's mainly to look at if you are trying to use a straight line upward or downward, if you already see the trend, and are all your dots are evenly distributed, or you have most of them are below the line or above the line. In that situation, you should consider using a curve to capture the trend of your time series. Okay. The next is called a seasonal pattern. A seasonal pattern is a recurring pattern over a successive period of time. The time series data may exhibit seasonal pattern of less than 1 year in duration, such as during traffic flow or weekly restaurant sales. So you can think about the seasonal pattern. It's very common, right? Every year we have holidays. If you're thinking about the sales, during the holidays, that's when it will have a lot of sale. After holiday, the sale will go down. So naturally, if you think about business world, a lot of business, they will have yearly pattern. And here I'm illustrating here is umbrella sales. As you can see, we do see the up and down. So I think a lot of students will get confused is between the horizontal band, a trend, and the seasonal pattern, right? Horizontal pattern and the seasonal pattern. So the big difference here is that you see the repeated cycles, right? If you look at this, we are showing the quarterly sale of the umbrella at the clothing store over the past 5 years. As you can notice that every year, the highest sale is occur in the second quarter when it's a summer, when it's more likely to have the rain, right? So those sale, if you look, all those peak is happening during the second quarter when the summer is happening. And then the lowest sale is at the fourth quarter every year, right? It makes sense because in the fourth quarter is winter. Instead of umbrella, you need a snow hat, right? So it makes sense. So although you see the up and down trend, but besides the up and down trend, you actually see the repeated pattern, okay? So if I go back to the horizontal pattern, you see the up and down, right? So this 12 weeks, even we expanding to the 24 weeks, you don't see the repeated pattern related to certain week. So like, right, you don't see that repeat pattern. So the seasonal pattern usually can be weekly, can be monthly, can be quarterly. So I see the quarterly and the monthly more often than weekly. So in this situation, although you can approximate the result with a horizontal line, we doesn't call this as a horizontal pattern. It's literally because we see the repeated pattern. Okay, so it's related to the quarters. So in this situation, we call the seasonal pattern. And then, of course, the data, the real world data, when you're dealing with it, you can see the data can have the combination of the trend and the seasonal pattern. So as I show you here is the smartphone sale. So the vertical axis is the quarterly sale, horizontal axis is the quarterly time. So as you can see, there is the upward trend, right? So if you try to draw a line, you can see there's the upward trend. So we see the trend pattern very quickly. And however, we also can find the seasonal pattern. As you can see, the first and the second quarter are lowest, and the third and the fourth quarter are the highest, and it repeat every year. So you almost can see a module, right? This pattern being repeated every year. So the first 2 quarters are lower, and then the last 2 quarters are higher. So in this case, we must use the forecasting method that are able to deal with both trend and the seasonality. Okay. So the last pattern we will cover is called the cyclical pattern. If you recall the principle of macroeconomics, you actually learned this cyclical already, right? We had a business cycle up and down. So we're actually leveraging the same idea to define a pattern here. A cyclical pattern exists if the time series display an alternating sequence of the point below and above the trend line lasting more than a year. Okay, so the big difference between the seasonal and the cyclical pattern is that if this up and down trend line lasting more than a year, okay? If you think about our business cycle, as you can notice that the business cycle we see is that the up and down trend line is lasting more than a year. So that's why in the economic time series commonly exhibit cyclical behavior with the regular round of the observation below and above the trend line. The cyclical component may be due to multiple year business cycle. So that's why we want to call this pattern out. Most of the data we are dealing with in the business world are highly impacted by the business cycle. So it's unavoidably we will be able to see the cyclical pattern. So the period of the moderate inflation followed by a period of the rapid inflation can lead to time series that fluctuate below and above a general increasing trend line. So because business cycles are extremely difficult, if not impossible to forecast, cyclical effects are often combined with the long-term trend effect and are referred to as trend cycle effects. Again, the reason we are learning different kind of pattern is because as we are studying the pattern, and then later we're gonna learn how can we map the model to the pattern. It's almost like you don't want to give a 6-month-old kids a 2-year-old clothes because they don't match, right? So based on the pattern and based on the characteristic model, we try to find the perfect match. Okay, so that's why it's very important to recognize the pattern before we dive into the model. Okay, in our next video, we're going to focus on how can we measure the accuracy of the forecast. And in that section, we're also going to learn a first very basic time series forecast model called a naive model. We are leveraging that very simple model to learn how can we measure the quality of our forecast.